Hello, I'm Jeff Sloan, and welcome to another episode of YPO Presents. I'm the president of Sloan Implement Company, a family-owned network of John Deere dealerships located in Illinois and Wisconsin, as well as Sloan Express, an online agricultural parts retailer. Today, we're excited to welcome two fellow YPO members and global leaders in the agriculture industry, Meryl Kennedy and Margo Andrae. Merrill is president and owner of Kennedy Rice Mill, aka KRM, located in Mer Rouge, Louisiana. KRM owns the retail rice brand Four Sisters, which is distributed in major grocers throughout the United States. Margo is CEO of Australian Pork Limited, a producer-owned organization supporting and promoting the Australian pork industry. Welcome, Meryl and Margo.
Good morning.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah. Good morning or good afternoon here.
Good afternoon. We're all over the place here. So yeah, I'm located in Central Illinois, so it's about 5 p.m. I think, Meryl, you're in Louisiana, probably Central Time as well.
That's right.
And then Margo's one day closer to the weekend. You're, is it Thursday morning there, I take it?
It is. So about 8 a.m. here in Canberra in Australia. So nice and early.
Very cool. Well, thank you both for joining us, and we'll dive right in. Before we get started, we'd like to remind all of you watching live to ask our guests questions by posting them in the comments section below. And if you're not following us already, please do so you can receive a notification when our next episode begins. So just diving right in, Meryl and Margo, again, thanks for taking the time to share your expertise on the topic of agriculture. But just a quick question before we dive deeper. How's business? Meryl, you can go first.
Yeah, so Jeff, as you and I both know, this year has been faced with several difficulties. In my part of the world, we had 2 hurricanes this past fall, and now extreme rain. So extreme weather it's been a big player, I feel like, in my world. Then you throw COVID on top of that, and it makes things super interesting. But overall, farmers are tough. God made farmers tough, so we're doing pretty well. And thankful that we're kind of coming through some of the worst of the pandemic. So thanks for asking.
Yeah, that sounds really positive. So Margo, if you got a second.
Yeah, and look, it's a little bit like Meryl. 2 years, just coming up to 2 years in the role, and we've had 2 pandemics. So I think, just started the new role, and then we had African swine fever impacting 30% of the global herd for pigs, unfortunately, and then of course we had COVID. But yeah, look, it has been an interesting year, and I think it's probably taught us all to put people first, and most importantly, I think it's put agriculture and food security back in the main arena, which is fantastic. So, but yeah, hopefully no more pandemics for a while.
Sure. Well, kind of the first question talks about that, and food security, and just what the disruption there was during COVID, kind of to put some context around it. But with long lines at food banks and empty grocery store shelves, the pandemic made clear just how fragile our food supply chain really is. In your estimation, Meryl and Margo, how can the agriculture industry improve the stability of how food travels from farm to table? And if possible, can you share specific examples from your business or overall trends that you're seeing? Meryl, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so, farmers know how important I feel like their role in the food supply chain is, but I don't think that consumers really understood that until the pandemic. So I hope, if anything, that, we now have kind of the realization that, it is a very fragile system, right? And we really are all interconnected, and we have to rely on each other for information and communicate with each other better. So I think overall we're seeing people throughout the entire supply chain take more precaution, right? Make sure that their supply chains are sound, make sure that they do things a little bit different. They don't always just rely on big data to tell them, how much to order, those kind of things. They're taking a little bit more protection. But in general, I think that, just many of our many of our global economies are tied together, right? So what influences part of the world influences other parts of the world. And all of our supply chains are kind of is all there together as one. So I think for the most part, I'm seeing people just take precautions, maybe start sourcing different products from 2 different regions of the country or 2 different parts of the globe, making sure that their supply chains and their partners are really partners, and that relationships are strong. And I don't know, Margo, if you're seeing the same in your industry.
Yeah, and I think it is. And I like that you use the word fragile, because fragile is a really good word. That we saw the panic buying. We saw people suddenly realize that they weren't prepared. We'd lost that, I guess, full pantries of tinned foods and prepared for, I don't know if you had it in the US, but, suddenly toilet paper became the hot commodity. Flying off the shelves. So you suddenly realize that there's basic essentials that, are important. And I think that's the thing hopefully everyone takes out of it. But the other thing I realized probably from an agriculture perspective is that when you suddenly work on the global scale and you're working on your exports and your imports and making sure that food security is there, we'd probably taken a step back from making sure people fully understood how the supply chain worked and in the government and things like that. So I think from right information at the right time to support good decision making, I think what I refer to as peacetime, post-pandemics, we probably need to be making sure we're getting those information to people. But I don't know if you've seen in the US, but here in Australia, we've seen people really start to recognise that they need to support their local agriculture systems. They need to look for where their food comes from and, most importantly, probably support their local industries. So when you don't have food, you suddenly realise that we rely on farmers and our agriculture systems. So,
and how grateful we are, right? I mean, both Australia and the US are big producers. So grateful to live in a place that produces food.
Very much so. Yeah, we really saw just how fragile the whole system can be, and one little change can really set things off. So jumping down to the next question, something that's kind of close to my industry, large ag and precision ag, and just the development of technology in the tools that farmers and ranchers are using day to day. But from self-driving tractors to genetically modified crops and feed to drones monitoring cattle and fields, technology is playing a large role in the agriculture industry. How have you implemented it in your business, and what are the challenges for onboarding new technology in what are often well-established legacy businesses like farms and ranches? Kind of just, technology and how you're managing to incorporate it in kind of a legacy business. Meryl, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I can go first. Well, you hit it right there on the nail. We are, utilizing the John Deere programs that are on the combines, tractors today. It has been a slow adoption process. The technology has been there on the tractors, but to your point, getting some of the legacy employees to utilize the data and then to understand how valuable that data could be to us has been a bit of a challenge. But as we have worked with our customers, to create more sustainable models, we realize that we've got to use the data from the farms. And so we've been pulling that off the tractors, and that probably is our biggest source of where we're getting our information from now. We're also looking at some other technology that's out there to help monitor our water usage. Those are pretty big initiatives in the U.S. We're pretty blessed here in like the Mississippi Delta, Northeast Louisiana area, because we have a lot of water. Rice obviously uses a lot of water, but still, as fuel prices go up, we'll still be under pressure to continue to decrease water usage. California, on the other hand, which is also a large rice production area, struggles with water, right? Cities need that water for their usage. So I think overall, we're learning to be more sustainable and use these kind of practices to help us do that. So, it's just, it takes a little bit of push and pull, but thankfully, if it can help us from a productivity level and cost savings level, then for the most part, everybody's on board. So
glad to hear you run that John Deere farm equipment.
we like John Deere here.
That's good news. Yeah. Margo, maybe how are your farmers, relying on technology and what they're doing on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, and we should give you a plug for John Deere. We all love our John Deeres. But, the pork industry is probably slightly different in that because a lot of it is intensive and free range. So probably labour has been our biggest thing. But, it's funny because we realise that there's probably a massive data highway that runs above our head. And so probably about 18 months ago, we looked for experts outside the industry and looked at the cyber fraud and financial fraud and things like that, and worked out from a domestic and national and even going into the global perspective, how can we use data? What data have we got available? For us in the food supply chain, traceability of the products is really important. And can we actually get to that real-time data traceability, monitoring, management? Can people pick up their phone right now and know exactly where their animals are, exactly where they've gone to? But it was a gentle reminder to us too when we're trying to work with some of the companies is a lot of the apps and things we were trying to use relied on smartphones, and some of the transport drivers didn't have smartphones. So it was almost a gentle reminder of we need to bring everybody along on that technology journey. But I think we're starting on the cusp of whether it's artificial intelligence or data. I think there's so much out there that we need to learn how to use it, but work with other industries. So working with rice and working with the manufacturing and the machinery and that of how that all connects, I think is probably the next big leap for us of don't work in isolation, what's it look like? And we're now trialling to see if we can, what we call push back the borders around biosecurity. Can you actually use data to identify risks and risk vectors before it actually leaves another country? And for us, with African swine fever spreading through 42 countries, and both our countries are African swine fever free, now more than ever, biosecurity for all of our industries is just so important. So I think it's an exciting time ahead, to be honest.
Yeah, I'd agree 100%. You kind of just look at the way technology is advancing so fast. And I think at the root of it is the data and how we're capturing the data. But we have reams of this data, so we didn't need to figure out how to utilize it, make smarter decisions based on the data. And I think we're getting there. But, I know on John Deere, their kind of motivation for the dealer is to capture the data at every pass in the field and to equip even the older, tractors or combines with a mobile gateway so that it can transmit, like you said, to the data highway over your head and capture all that into the cloud, and to have it centrally located, and then to then be able to direct it, not just your equipment dealer, but maybe to your, the rice elevator, or maybe to your, the livestock producer or something, to kind of, in conjunction use that data so you both can gain advantages from it. So kind of just like
Margo said, we're trying to also put together how to merge that data all the way through, right? So I think that they're probably a step ahead of us, and Europe is as well, but consumers want to know where their food comes from and what field, who grew it, those kind of things. So if we can use the data from the John Deere programs all the way through the supply chain, it'll be a good day. We'll get there.
That's right. Hang in there. We dabbled on data. Any more comments on data, collecting data? How are you using data? Or
do you know, I think there's still probably an element of, we've been so conscious about who owns the data that maybe we've been sort of held back, as opposed to looking at the opportunities for what you can use the data for, and how it can actually improve business, and whether it's your bottom line, whether it's around your sustainability, understanding your soils and all of those sorts of things. So I think sometimes we get caught up because we're worried about what might be, and I think we actually need to have a little bit of trust in each other on what we're going to use the data for. But I think exactly right, Meryl. It's a supply chain approach rather than just the individual pockets and then going from there.
We kind of hit a buzzword there, Margo. You touched on the word sustainability, and you're hearing that quite a bit. Industries trying to prioritize the environment and, have a long-term sustainable business. How can professional organizations, kind of like for your pork producers, or how can governments incentivize farmers or ranchers to become more sustainable?
Yeah, and it's funny because probably here in the pork industry, we see sustainability as what I refer to as a 360. So it's not just about industry, it's not just about consumers, it's about the whole thing. So we actually, from our sustainability perspective, we have 4 elements, which is people, pigs, planet, and prosperity. And the reason there is that, you need people. We need to be developing our people and attracting and retaining people into our industries. Our animals need to have the highest level of animal welfare. We need to be showing biosecurity leadership to protect our animals. And, we are very privileged to provide food for people, and we take that very seriously. But I guess from the pork industry perspective, from an environmental side of things too, many people might not know, we've actually reduced our carbon footprint by 69% in the last 30 years. We've reduced our water usage by 80%. We have a production method now that we take waste from other industries, like the dairy industry. So I have a farm here, for example, that takes 1 million litres of byproducts from the dairy industry every week and converts that to liquid feed. And then they're capturing the methane and powering their piggeries. So we have 16% of industry is actually powered by what I call pig power. So our production cycle actually has an opportunity to really give back more than we take, I guess is how we see it. So that's the environmental and the planet part. But most importantly, we've got to remember our businesses have to prosper. They have to be financially viable as well. So we feel the combination of the 4 actually brings it all together. But it's funny watching the change in language from sustainability to biodiversity to carbon sequestration. I think at the end of the day, we need to come back to the bottom line is we want to leave the planet better for those around us, and reducing waste, ensuring people do. I mean, 30% of all food here in Australia, and I'm not sure of the global numbers, is wasted. So how do we actually change people's thinking around the whole use of food? So sustainability to me is much more, and I think again it's about how do you look at it as a whole picture rather than just one area. But we do have incentives. We have stewardship programs where we want to actually encourage producers to celebrate what they've been doing for their land and that they are stewards of the land moving forward. No producer in any industry wants to be detrimental to their land, because that doesn't make any business sense either, and they don't want to leave it any worse for their children and their grandchildren. So whether it's incentives or it's just a recognition or actually making supporting consumers to understand that we are all doing the right thing by the planet, I think there's a big conversation to be had there. I'm not sure your thoughts, Meryl.
Yeah, Margo, I feel really almost the exact same way. I do think that the consumer today doesn't realize how far agriculture has come in general. So I don't have the numbers in front of me on the rice industry and all the measures we've taken for reduction of water usage, reduction in chemical usage, reduction in, all these things, right? And sustainability does really start with the farmer and the owner of the land, which are the stewards of the land, right? So just naturally, we take care of the land because that's what we want. We want our generations to have better land than we left it, and we want it to produce more product, and we need to reduce our waste and our cost and those kind of things. So, that's one thing that I hope consumers realize is how much progress ag across all sectors have made in the last 30 to 40 years, and that we continue to work on. This is something very dear to many of our hearts. I do think that sustainability is kind of a buzzword because more people have become aware of the environment and how do we maintain the environment or improve the environment for generations to come. And so there's a lot of point the finger at ag. And I do think that there can be improvements made. Some of the big data that we just talked about will drive some of those improvements, right? Will help us make some of those improvements. But also, you touched on a point earlier about, how we can share data, and I agree. The problem kind of comes down back a little bit to, how do we get people over the hump of sharing data when there's not a lot of financial incentive for that? And so there is a kind of a fear from a farmer level that data will be used against them, maybe on pricing, maybe on other metrics, right? Especially if they don't control that whole supply chain. And they're really kind of the original piece of it, right? It comes from that tractor on the farm. We need that in order to complete the supply chain loop. We need that to tell the story of the farmer from a sustainability measurement. So I think that there's definitely ways that we can incentivize farmers. We can educate farmers. We can helpfully share that information and use that data correctly. And a lot of those things are being improved upon, and people like even Syngenta here in the U.S., John Deere. There's another program. They're creating incentives along with large companies. I can think of Mars, Kellogg's. I mean, these people all have big sustainability projects going on. And those are just companies in our industry. So yeah, it's going to be interesting the next couple of years how it all unfolds. But I think that the main focus is just let's tell the story, right? Farmers haven't told the story. Ag hasn't told the story. And we need to tell our story a little bit better.
And Meryl, I'm not sure if you're similar to us, but one of the things around telling our story is ensuring that from a regulation perspective, we are working really closely with what we call states and federal governments to understand that we are making improvements and what that looks like. And it's exactly as you said, the data isn't highlighting an issue. It's actually a starting point for improvement, and how we make sure that the red tape and the barriers and things like that don't actually impede us progressing. I think it's really important as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, there is a big initiative around what we can do with our legislators and educating them on what is feasible, what's not. Unfortunately, occasionally kind of these fear tactics come into place, and people start believing things that aren't necessarily science-backed. But overall, the rice industry here in the U.S., at least I can speak for, has a very good relationships with its legislators. And it's just about education of people that are maybe not on the farm or not close to the farm. And that, takes time. So.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to our approach of we don't expect people to know about us. Our role is to actually give people the information they need to make the right decisions.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's a good perspective to have.
Mm.
Yeah, no, I'm seeing it firsthand as my customers, farmers that have traditionally done, deep tillage practices and, brought up, eroded a lot of topsoil, are now looking at alternatives to minimize those passes, maybe plant a cover crop to do some of that, carbon sequestration. And what's driving it is partly, the results on the farm. They're seeing, the genetics able to supply, a bountiful yield with fewer passes over, but there's also talk of carbon credits or some financial gain as well. So
absolutely.
So I'd say incentives work. They definitely caught farmers' attention to maybe change their practices up, but at the end of the day, I think long term it just makes the land that much more productive. And as they're going to hand it down from generation to generation, they really need to take care of it like they should. So, and talking about farmland, we know how lucrative it can be for agriculture, for raising livestock or growing a crop, but it can also be lucrative for other purposes than growing food. So, have you seen any any reality like this affecting your industry as far as the usage of land in your area?
I mean, we have, for instance, we've seen a lot of solar panel companies come into our area to put solar panels and usage of different types of electricity, those kind of things. I think urban crawl is a bit of a problem in parts of ag land that have been traditionally closer to cities, right? So where it's been kind of gobbled up by urban crawl. So yeah, I think that this is definitely a concern. I think overall, though, for the most part, people that own farmland want the best for it, right, and want to protect it and those kind of things. And so hopefully these are kind of one-offs and not necessarily something that we'll see take our land. I also think that we're producing more food on less acreage now. So overall, maybe some of these projects are not bad. Maybe this is a new use for the land as we continue to increase our yields. Although, we're going to still need to produce more food for the rising global population. I think that, this would be a concern for many years. Margo, are you seeing some of the same things I'm mentioning?
Yeah, we have, and I remember an interesting debate, a few years ago here in Australia where there was amazing prime agriculture land that was going to be reallocated for mining. And so it kind of comes back to that balance of where we're going in the future. And, a couple of things there, like I was reading that the younger generation now is the highest energy using generation ever with the mobile phones and the technology and things like that. So energy use and swapping your mobile phones out so regularly. So we've kind of got that balance of feeding a very fast growing population. And again, yesterday I was on a UN summit for food security, and they were saying that 25% of the population will be in Africa, which doesn't have those main big agriculture supply support. So how do we provide food security whilst this balance of a changing generation or a changing world, I guess? And but it's around, I guess, from probably the last 18 months especially, I think my approach is we need to actually be more vocal, tell our story, but actually ask the general, not ask, that's probably not the right word. We would like the general public to actually celebrate agriculture so that when these do come up, and you talked about the urban sprawl, it's absolutely, we've lost some major horticulture industries from the cities because they are now land housing developments. And of course people need homes and they have a right to have a home, but how do you have that balance in a very fast changing world to ensure that we can actually feed that growing population? So and I even come back to, with the travel and we've all learnt in the last 18 months, we don't have to be on planes as much. We can do things like this, which they do work and it is fantastic. So where do we find that balance? But yeah, it's got to be an open conversation that is talking about the next 10, 20 years, not now.
For sure. Yeah, anecdotally, we have some dairy farmers in our trade area, and what they do with the manure that runs off of the dairy farm, it really drives up the prices for the farmland surrounding their farms just so they have a place to spread it out equally. And it's amazing what the cost per acre is just for that usage. Just there's such a high demand to have open spaces to do those things. So you hear figures like $20,000 an acre, mainly to have the rights that you could pump off the manure. So land values have really around me taken skyrocketed a little bit, and I think they kind of follow suit with commodities and lower interest rates as well. So that might be part of it. But then the old adage of, well, they're not making any more of it. So, it's always looked upon as a strong investment as well. So,
no doubt.
No doubt. Transitioning from farmland, and maybe we just look at, put your inventor's hat on. And if you could look, if you could create a product for the agricultural industry today, what problem would you try to solve, or would you try, have an entrepreneur or somebody come into the industry and solve that problem for you? Meryl, do you want to go first?
Yeah, Margo hit on this earlier, but food waste is a serious concern here in the U.S. too. And, we're making all types of alternative meat type products, right? I mean, these are kind of the hot products when I go to When we're looking at new product development, those kind of things, we're seeing a lot of people use rice and as really a filler for kind of alternative meats and products like that. But so the idea that we can use maybe veggies and grain type products to make substitute meats, I mean, maybe we should think about what we can do to decrease the amount of food waste we have, not only at the grocery store level, but also at retail, as far as in restaurants, and just the way that we consume food too as a culture. I think that unfortunately, when we buy smaller, we use a lot of packaging, right, which isn't really a sustainable thing. So can we package a little bit different as a food industry so that people can buy in smaller quantities? Can we put food closer to the consumers so they don't have to buy so much in bulk? Those are all, ideas on how to reduce some of the food waste.
Yeah, and it's always interesting going second because they're fantastic ideas. And probably flowing through of, one of the biggest issues we have is around packaging that is compostable or does break down. It's better for the environment, but you still have the shelf life. We still, to reduce the food wastage. So it's almost like we're stuck in a little bit of a battle of we need to ensure that there's good shelf life so people can do the groceries in the weekly shop and things like that, but whilst also having packaging that is more environmentally friendly, and how that does. But, it's funny, I've been around agriculture for, I won't give away my age, but, a couple of decades. But really one of the things that keeps coming through is how do we tell our story? Like, how do we tell the story of agriculture? And I used to say that we went on the bent of making sure people had access to good food, and so we kind of got pushed to the outsides of the supermarkets, and then there's lots of processed foods and things like that in the middle. And it's kind of a case of how do we ensure the value placed on agriculture is there moving forward, and people do understand, and I think COVID has helped with that. But yeah, I think we're sort of looking at, you can scan the barcode and tell the story, but people are still a little bit nervous about telling stories and things like that. So if there was an immersion technology that could really demonstrate how we do what we do, why we do it, in that quick screen when you're choosing to buy a product, I think that's the advancements I'd love to see. So.
That's cool. It makes me think I take my kids to like a children's museum or Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, and they have these big displays on this is what agriculture really is. They kind of, introduce it to maybe people that aren't surrounded by it day to day. So kind of on a childlike level, that's kind of where it starts. And I see a lot of advantages with that for sure.
Yeah, I was actually at Disney about a month ago, and they had a program like that at Epcot. I was really impressed that the lines weren't quite as long, but people at least were telling the story about ag, and they had new ways to grow food and some new technologies that I hadn't even seen. They're kind of in their little micro greenery, so it was neat.
Yeah, and I still think probably from a global perspective, telling the story of ag, and there's still countries, I've been lucky enough to go to other countries where refrigerators aren't common. Access to regular, safe protein isn't common. So I think on how we, from a food security perspective, actually support those other countries to have access to good, reliable food. Because as I said, I do see it as a privilege that we get to provide food to people. So yeah, I think it's not that you want to overwhelm people with it, but I guess just I think we are very lucky, and sometimes we forget that we are so lucky to have everything at our fingertips, and gone are the days of seasonal food, as we used to say, that it was only certain times of the year you could get beautiful fruits and things like that. We almost get upset if we can't buy it at the supermarket that day. So how we sort of come back to that basic of really enjoying food and seasonal food, and but making sure everyone does actually have access to good, safe food.
And just moving right along, and I'm really intrigued to hear the response to this question, mainly because I'm a fourth generation male running this company, and I have three daughters. So if we're going to hand it off to the fifth generation, it's going to be female family that's going to be running it. So I'd just like to hear the two of you, kind of your perspective. Share some insight on your journey to becoming female leaders in ag, and what you see for women's leadership in the industry going forward. Meryl, you want to go first?
Yeah, so Jeff, this is very dear to my heart. When you share with me this story, I'm the fourth daughter to a farmer, and really I like to joke and tell people I was the last hope. Having daughters was not what was wished. My grandmother cried when I was born. So I understand. It's interesting because my father always really encouraged me all growing up, and I really didn't think that I wanted to work on the farm. In fact, I went off and I have a degree in international affairs, and he finally kind of wrote me back in. He told me that he wasn't going to pay for me to get my master's unless I worked for him for a summer. And so I thought that was a great deal, right? I was like, oh, I mean, this is awesome. I have no idea how I'm going to pay to get my master's. So that sounds like a great deal because I'm going to hate it. I'm going to hate living in rural Louisiana, a town of 500. And I'm going to, obviously I don't like, it's not that I necessarily didn't like it. It was almost that I didn't see that I had a fit, right? There was no place for me that I thought that I fit. And what I quickly learned that summer was that agriculture is much bigger than driving a tractor, and that that's only part of it. And then that creature that man, I call him a creature, but because he is kind of a creature, the idea of like a little farmer with a pitchfork and sitting on the tractor, that's not realistic. There's so much more dynamic to agriculture than what we associate and this goes back to storytelling, right? It goes back to what, even as a child, I believed. I grew up with this my entire life, and I still imagine the man in the overalls and the plaid with the pitchfork. So, it wasn't until he really pushed me in, and it was, kind of a sink or swim situation, that I realized how dynamic and how international and how much goes into agriculture and food supply and what we really were doing. We trade rice all over the world now. I have contacts in almost every single country. It's just phenomenal, the interweb and the connections that you make, and how small this industry is and how supportive it is. And so over the years, I never really saw myself as a leader for other women in the industry. I just was doing what I love to do, right? And people started telling me, what about my daughter? Maybe she could do what you're doing, and things like that. Similar stories to yours. And so I started mentoring some young girls. And I think that there was just really no role model for me, right? There was nobody that I could say, hey, she can do it, so maybe I can. And so if I'm that person for people that are behind me, or people that are deciding that maybe they only have daughters, or maybe it's their daughter is the more capable one, right? We need people to come back to the farms. We need people to live in rural places and to support our rural economy. And that doesn't necessarily mean they have to be male, right? It can be, and that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm physically able to do some of the things that men can do. It just means that there's a lot more to ag than that, right? So I think that it's a really beautiful place to be. We've had a lot of women come now into the company, probably because they see that there's other women that like this too, and they can be part of it. And then I see people like Margo across the world from me, and I'm just, it makes my heart kind of shine. So, encourage your daughters. Sometimes it takes a little bit more of a, push than a pull. But I think that, agriculture really is a very dynamic industry, and the men in it have been extremely supportive of me. So I think that there's room for all of us.
That sounds very promising. Thanks for sharing that. Margo, do you have anything to chime in on?
Yeah, and look, probably, I mean, a starting point is that, you know, there's only 5% of all CEOs are female. There's only 14% of all board directors are female. So we've got some work to do,
Right.
as I say. And it really is a case of, I look at it, it's a little bit like what Meryl was saying. It's about being visible. And I often say where you don't have to fit. It's okay to look different. It's okay to sound different. It's okay to be you. But if you're not authentic around what you're doing, then people won't really understand that it doesn't matter what gender you are. It's about who you are and what you bring to the role. But there's certainly still a lot of work, and I've been lucky enough to run rural women's programs and young scholarships for young people, and even my own team here. Without really thinking, I have 70% of my team is female, because we provide an environment that does allow part-time work. It does have great maternity leave support. It does have good policies and procedures. So I think we need to, there's an active part of being visible, but making our working environments more family friendly, more people friendly, having a focus on people. But also it really is around a recognition that it is not the pitchfork and the farmer and the hat. You know, I wear stiletto heels every single day, and that's who I am. So that's how people know me. But I don't need to be different to do these roles. But I do say to a lot of the women out there is sometimes you do unfortunately come up, and I'm often sitting in rooms where I'm the only female, and sometimes you just think, oh, life's too short for this. You know, people are literally waiting for me to finish talking before they talk over me. But you just got to keep going. You just don't give up. Be yourself, be authentic, and get your voice heard, and be visible to other women, and let them know that that's okay. And most importantly, say yes to an opportunity. I know that the data is there that women will look at a selection criteria, and unless they meet 75% of it, they won't apply for the role. Back your skills, back yourself, and put yourself forward and say yes to opportunities. So I think there's a wonderful world of agriculture that does have a very strong place for female leaders in it. So, and I'm, like Meryl, excited to be part of it now, and encourage other young women like your daughters to realise the world is a big opportunity. You've just got to say yes.
For sure. I may, call on you two after this to do even more mentoring, but I think this is a good start. So thanks for sharing that.
Happy to do it.
Yeah.
As we're winding down, we've got actually quite a few questions that have come in through the various social platforms. So maybe I'll dive in there with our very first one. And it comes from on LinkedIn. Aaron Z wants to know, how is AI impacting your business or industry? I can answer that real quick. One bit of technology that comes to mind is a new from John Deere called See and Spray. So a sprayer is retrofitted with enough cameras that it can identify the weed from the crop, and then apply the herbicide directed at the weed, and to save the plant, rather than just broadcasting it and wasting it. So there's thought that it will minimize the amount of herbicide application by as much as like 90%. So there's computers and cameras and sensors that's making up that making those decisions at split-second rates. So that'd be that kind of the top of mind for me when it comes to AI in my industry. Either of you two have anything you'd like to share?
It's really funny when you work in the livestock industry, because AI means two things: artificial insemination or artificial intelligence.
I think he was meaning the former, yeah.
So thank goodness you went first, because I would have gone down a completely different path. So, but the reality is, it's a really good question, and it's something that we balance with here, because from an animal welfare perspective, we still are a high workforce, because the animals, we have a high level of care for those animals. So now we're looking at where artificial intelligence can actually play a role. And whether that's around the forecasting and the analysis of data, or whether it is around looking at different ways of herd health and monitoring. You know, I know globally there are some pork industries that are trying to use AI as the 24-hour monitoring of the herd health. Can the cameras, can they detect different changes in temperature of the animals? Can they see changes in behaviour of the animals? So taking what we know and what we see and what we feel and how you do that. So I think we're going to see rapid changes in this space, but I think there's still always got to be that balance between where you still need that level of human interaction, probably from a livestock perspective. But Meryl, you've probably got a bit more from a plant perspective as well.
Yeah, so I mean, what he just shared, what Jeff just shared about the tractors, that's extremely interesting to me. I mean, that'll be a huge help. Not necessarily AI, but definitely blockchain technology. Again, back to that point on trying to trace it all the way back. We do the same thing that you were referring to earlier at the plant, at the actual mill level, right? We can trace everything back from a food safety perspective. You know, if there's a recall, those kind of things, it can be traced back to a lot number when we produced it. But if we could get it all the way back to the farm level, and that there's a way to do that using technology, I think that's probably the way of the future. And then if we can also use some AI technology to help us on the farm level, that would be great. We have seen some retail partners use these type of technologies to actually do some of the, I would say, the logistics side or the warehouse side of their business, right? So when we ship in product, being, you know, scanning in certain ways, right? Making sure that the replenishment is correct. So it's big data, but it's also using some AI technology in order to kind of predict when the consumers are going to buy products, what day of the week, what hour even. So kind of tapping into some of those things is also really interesting. You know, there's also some marketing initiatives around when we think people buy based on just, it's crazy, but based on if it's raining or not, right? Based on certain ways that people react. And we all know this social media, how people react to social media messaging, those kind of things, but it can be even bigger than that. So yeah, technology, I think, will be a big part of ag. It'll just be how fast we can adapt.
Yeah, I think you know, we got to give farmers credit. They're pretty cutting edge, so I think they'll, you know, adapt faster than we expect them to. So,
you know, that's one great thing about the pandemic, Jeff, is that we've all had to adapt to technology faster than normal. So people are not so scared of it anymore. Even older generations seem to be way more accepting, and that's encouraging to me.
I think you're right. We'll go to another question from Twitter. Carrie B asks, how can farmers share the progress they've made on sustainability with consumers? How will consumers know? Is it marketing, packaging, or other? I think this came up probably in the initial discussion, but you know, are there, you know, hard examples of how you're explaining that message to your customers of your, you know, achievements with sustainability?
I think this goes back to Margo's great idea to create some kind of, you know, when we have QR codes that, you know, you scan on the back of the package and it can tell the story, or this blockchain kind of technology that I've been talking about, getting back to the farm level, right, actually to where that seed was planted, and how, you know, maybe we can talk about how much water we saved, or the usage of chemical reduction, those kind of things when they pull that up. But how we tell that story, to Margo's kind of point earlier, does get a bit complicated. You know, getting consumers' attention is hard. Are they going to scan that code? You know, are they going to pay attention to the packaging? How do we tell that story? So as technology improves, hopefully we're able to improve the way that we communicate as well.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we've always said is you have to be able to demonstrate the change. So you have to this is where we're quite lucky because we are a research and marketing combined. So we do the whole and the policy and regulation. But our view has been you have to be able to monitor, measure, and then make the improvements from there. So the fact that we can actually say we've reduced our carbon emissions by that 70% over 30 years is because we've tracked it and we've measured it. We haven't told the story yet. We've started probably the last sort of couple of years of really putting that story out. But the other thing is that we have to use a language that people understand. There's so many confusing terms, and most people wouldn't know what carbon sequestration is in terms of what it means for their food. Like, what does that mean? So I think it's really important to measure, to benchmark it, to show your improvements based on the science and where you're going. And then most importantly, I think it's to communicate in a language that people understand. And we've got programs here where we've gone into schools to help young people understand the importance of protein and what the sustainability story is. And I use the word societal celebration. It really is that it comes back to my point earlier, is getting consumers to actually celebrate what we're doing with the land, what we're doing with our animals, and that we are actually giving back more than we take. So yeah, measure and then tell.
No, that's great. Yeah, your livestock producers, they'll definitely benefit from you telling that story for sure. A question comes from LinkedIn. Jeff Brandt wants to know, how do you expect the breakthroughs in the development of RNA-based COVID vaccines to trickle down into treating livestock diseases and possibly crop infestations and crop diseases? So I don't know if that's really in your wheelhouse, but any connection to RNA technology, seeing that in livestock or crop health?
I think from a livestock perspective, we've learned that we can probably do things quicker, that we can start from synthetic bases on things. But I think from completely outside of that, from what we're learning in some of the attempts to create an African swine fever vaccine, is that it can go wrong too. So there's got to be that level of being careful, don't roll it out until we're careful. But I think there is opportunities in genomics and genetics and getting these streams and isolating those RNAs down to help us advance. So again, it probably comes back to that science, underpin what we do with good science. But I actually think that it's a huge opportunity, and I think there's a huge recognition now that we need to continually invest in the basic science and what we're doing.
Yeah, so, Jeff, this is not my expertise wheelhouse, but most consumers don't realize that rice is actually non-GMO naturally. And a lot of that is because they mix, it's not genetically modified, but they can take different genetics and merge them together to get better varieties, right? Without genetically modifying that. And I think that absolutely there is science behind what we can do to increase plant health, right? So I think that it's exciting. I think that new research and science that hopefully can be adapted by both the livestock and plant industries is nothing but a positive. I think if we looked at the progression that we've made in the definitely last 50 years since my father started farming, and we would be blown away with what probably will happen in the next 50.
No doubt. Kind of moving through some more, listener viewer questions. On Twitter, Carrie B wants to know, in the US, a big news story is a decline in population. Will exporting become a revenue stream in the future? I see the rally right now in corn prices and soybean prices, and I think a lot of that's targeted to what China's doing. So, we're always, our biggest, our soybean crop would historically be exported to China, and it's good to see them coming back in the market. But do you think a decline in population in the U.S. is going to cause, or decline in population in general?
I think that this goes back, Jeff, to a little bit of education. I don't think people realize how much we already export. I mean, we export 50% of the rice crop Right now, corn and soy, I don't know what the numbers are, but they're higher than that. The U.S. is really the breadbasket of the world. We export quite a lot of our products. We're really one of the stronger export economies of the U.S. I think that where we're seeing pressure is actually on imports. So we're seeing a lot of imported rice come into the U.S. Products that we already produce ourselves are seeing I've seen a lot of organic corns, things like that come into the U.S. Products that maybe we can produce here in the U.S., but we're not. So as we see a declining population, we could see some of our domestic sales actually get eroded because that population is demanding other products that maybe we're not making. But yeah, I mean, there's so much of our industry that relies on trade negotiations and what other countries are facing and how we're supporting those. So it's definitely a world economy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and look, I think flowing on that theme, it absolutely is. I mean, I think through COVID, we learned that a lot of our manufacturing is global. It's not here in Australia whether it's cars. We don't have major manufacturers of cars here in Australia anymore, which is a huge sort of wake-up call of when you can't import cars and things like that. Yeah, how do you do that? What does it look like? And we do produce more food than we use, and we're a major exporter. But on the global scale, we're very small. So I think our meat sector is about 2% of the global trade in terms of export. And a bit like what you said, Meryl, within the pork industry, 80% of our ham and bacon here in Australia is imported. And most people wouldn't realise that it is imported. So we've done a massive campaign around truth in labelling and country of origin labelling and to support our Aussie pork producers here. But I think it does come back to that. I'm not a bit like the RNA question, declining population within the US is probably not something I know of. I know our population's probably stalled because borders are closed and we don't have immigration growing at the same level at the moment. But yeah, we're just operating in a global world now. So I think it's how we work together and what that looks like, because the reality is we can't do everything ourselves.
No, that's very true. I guess as we get to the top of the hour, maybe we'll just have one last question, more just less on ag, more on YPO. And that question is, as members of the larger YPO community that includes more than 30,000 members in 142 countries, what do you feel are the benefits of being part of an organization like YPO? And what can it do for founders, entrepreneurs, and business leaders like yourselves? Meryl, you've started us off on all the other questions, so if you don't mind, just round it out.
So I was very fortunate, I feel like, to have the opportunity to join YPO. I was very young. But YPO has truly been a safe place for me, probably too because I'm female, but a safe place for me to meet other leaders, right? Connect with other like-minded people, be energized. I find so much energy from my peers in YPO. And maybe because I live in a rural area too, but being connected to people in all different types of industries. I've met people from all over the world that I consider friends. I actually went and saw a friend from YPO, Margo, in Australia a couple of years ago. So, it's just provided me a way to really connect with those like-minded people and forge true, deep, very deep friendships. So I'm very grateful for that. And from a business perspective, it's pushed me in ways I've never thought were imaginable. Again, probably because I just find so much energy from being around people that I feel like, how am I even in this room? So it's a wonderful organization, wonderful people, and I couldn't say enough good things.
And I'm probably a little bit the same, is that you can become very engaged in your day-to-day and start to just live in the world that you're in. And being part of a YPO network is You're sitting around a table with entrepreneurs, completely different industries. Meryl and I talking about rice, and it was interesting that, we're talking, someone asked me about the rice conference here and did I know any speakers, and I'm like, well, in actual fact, I know this amazing young lady in the US, and you just wouldn't have that opportunity, even in a world where we're so connected, if you don't know what's out there and you don't know these amazing people. It's just, it's not an easy thing to do. So I think from the perspective of broadening perspective, expanding your networks, and actually not being too small thinking, you do think globally now. And I think that's what YPO provides all of us. And it is a safe zone to say, I'm a bit stuck here, what can I do here? Or I've had this great idea, can I talk it through? So it's not often we have a completely safe zone when you work in commercial environments that you can just be open and honest and talk. But yeah, that would be the benefits for me.
Yeah, I'd echo those sentiments as well. I've had great experience, and I know I was lucky that my family was actually part of YPO, so they kind of showed me the benefits. And now that I've been involved for 3 years, I hear them loud and clear, and I feel very fortunate I've had the opportunity. So I'd highly recommend it as well. So,
it's funny. It's no matter where you are in the world, if you find out you've met somebody that's in YPO, you're like automatically, you're my friend.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily matter anything else, but you just realize that person probably you can connect with, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that you have something in common with, and it's a wonderful network.
Very much so.
Yeah, and in a world where, we're all so busy, sometimes it's nice to make new friends.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's fun to do an Ask the Expert, video call too. So,
well, Jeff, thank you for hosting us. Seriously.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Meryl and Margo, for joining. Thanks to everybody that tuned in. Sorry that we didn't get to some of your questions, but I appreciate the contributions. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends or followers and connections. Don't forget to follow YPO on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, so you can be the first people to learn about the next episode. So appreciate Meryl and Margo for your time, and Carrie and Every and Danielle in the green room for helping host an excellent roundtable. So everybody have an excellent day.
Yep. And huge thank you to everyone.